Hello, everyone. We will get started in just a few minutes. Welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining. And as you're joining, if you want to, in the chat room, write down where you are. We'll get to see where all the participants are from. So take a minute in the chat room and let us know where you're coming from. Ooh, look at all that. California, North Carolina, Missouri, Ohio, Alaska. Wow. Casper, Wyoming. Wonderful. New York City. All over. That is fantastic. People are still joining, so we'll wait just a few more minutes. We have Canada, another Wyoming, Seattle. Hope everybody is doing well. We know it's been a tough time. Welcome, welcome. Okay, we will get started in another 30 seconds. Welcome, everybody. Such a great group. And nice to see a number of familiar, not faces, names. I can't see anybody's face, but welcome, everyone. And just so you know, everybody is muted, just so we don't have too much sound. We're already over 220 people online, and it would be very noisy if we opened it up. Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining, and welcome to our webinar series. My name is Judy Browse. As many of you know, I'm the Executive Director of NAAEE, and I'm so thrilled you all could join us. And I might have to turn off my video periodically, and I apologize. Our internet at home is very unstable, as you all probably know that feature. I do want to say that I realize that so many of you have been on webinars, you've run webinars, and we are so excited to have a chance today to focus on what actually makes a good webinar. And I have to tell you, it is a little intimidating to be running a webinar with the guru of webinars on the line. So we're going to do our best, and Andy is always very nice to us, so we're very fortunate. And we couldn't have a better person than Andy Goodman, who's from the Goodman Center, and his colleague Celia, who will be with us today. And I'll introduce Andy more fully in a minute. As we know, the world has changed in the last month, and all of us, everybody on the line, is coping with this new reality. And I know it's affecting absolutely everything we do, including our holidays. So for all of you who are celebrating holidays this week with Easter and Passover, I hope you can enjoy your families from afar, and that you actually might even have more time to spend with your family and friends, even if it's through Zoom or FaceTime or some other platform. And for those of you who are regular to our webinars, you know that we hold them normally every month. During this crisis, we are trying to hold more webinars on a variety of topics, and Anne will mention what's coming up later, but they're focused on how we as educators can help cope with the pandemic and the work we're doing, and with topics that might really be focused on what can we do during this time. But we're also going to have webinars that are focused on new insights, learning, and how to bring joy to our work during this time. So stay tuned for all kinds of upcoming webinars. I do want to thank our affiliate co-hosts across North America who are working with us to sponsor this ongoing webinar series. I hope all of you will take time to learn more about your affiliates and get engaged in environmental education at the state, provincial, and regional level. And I really appreciate all of you joining during a time when it is so stressful. I know many of you have had so many webinars. You've been on so many Zoom calls and other platforms. So it's great to see so many of you on the line. I know that not everybody does use Zoom, even though many of you know it and could probably build it yourself by now. I want to make sure you know how to communicate with us because you are on mute. So in the chat room, which is on the toolbar, you can send a chat to either all of us, the panelists that you can see, or to everyone. And you can add your questions, you can add resources. Feel free throughout the whole presentation to do that. Andy's going to answer as many as we can throughout, and then afterward he'll stay on a bit to answer more, and we'll be recording this and you'll get a copy of all of this, including the slides. So don't worry about taking notes or anything, you'll get all of it. And then I also want to thank Ann Umali, who is on our team and is the Director of Professional Development at EE360. She's on the line helping to handle a lot of the technicalities behind the scenes. So if you have any issues, please send a note to her, or you can send an email to her as well in the chat or an email. And now I am really excited to introduce Andy Goodman. I first heard Andy giving a presentation on how to give a presentation years ago. And from then on, I was completely hooked. He has been such a terrific supporter of NAAE, and several years ago, he gave a wonderful keynote address focused on storytelling at our conference in San Diego, and it's on our YouTube channel if you want to hear it. He's a fantastic communicator. He cares about helping nonprofits succeed, and he believes that all of us can make sure that good presentations and webinars happen to good people. And he's been such a great friend of ours. Andy Goodman is the director of the Goodman Center. He's a well-known author, speaker, and consultant working in public interest communications. He's a pro on storytelling, how to give great presentations, how to conduct, and he's conducted a lot of workshops on strategic communications. He wrote the book, which I encourage all of you to get, on why bad presentations happen to good causes. And he also did a webinar for us on that. And today he'll be helping us think about how we can all run better webinars. He's also spoken at a number of different organizations, agencies around the world, including Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, and many others. And one of Andy's past clients, and I totally agree with, said that Andy takes your best ideas and makes them better. So Andy is all about good causes and helps so many of us do better at what we do. So I'll turn it over now to Andy so you can hear from the pro. And let's give him a very warm virtual welcome. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Judy. Let me share my screen here for a second. Get that off there, hold on. And, can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Very good. So thank you, Judy, and thank you everybody for joining today. It's really a pleasure to have this opportunity, and thank you, Judy, for that very generous introduction. Everything we do at the Goodman Center, we do as a team. With me online also right now is our Associate Director, Celia Hoffman. She will be monitoring the chat box, so if you have a question there, Celia will be keeping an eye on it, and I'll be turning to her periodically to find out what it is you'd like to know. Judy told you a lot about the Goodman Center, and I appreciate that. We do a lot of teaching online, and we have rejiggered our schedule for April and May so that we can offer more courses while you're at home. So after today, if you like the way we do this, maybe you want to take one of our classes. We have classes in storytelling coming up starting next week. We'll be offering classes in how to have meetings in person, meetings for people who hate meetings. We'll also be offering the webinar version of the workshop that Judy attended, Why Bad Presentations Happen to Good Causes, and we'll also be talking about strategic communication. So if any of those interest you, please check out our website, thegoodmancenter.com, and maybe we will meet again later this month. After we're done today, you're going to get two handouts. One is a summary of the key slides you're going to see today. So if you're a note taker, great. I don't like to discourage note taking, but know that anything you see up on the screen today that has specific recommendations will be coming your way. And also there's a report called Dialing In, Logging On, Nodding Off, which we'll be sending you as well after class. And please make this window as large as possible. The bigger you make it, the more you'll be able to see everything. We want you to see everything clearly. So with that said, let's dive in. Let me tell you what we're going to talk about in a very quick hour today in the webinar on webinars. First, I want to talk a little bit about sort of the promise versus the reality. You know, we meet this way because we're told it's cost effective, it saves time, it's a great way to bring people together when they're not all in the same place. That's the promise. The reality can be a little bit different. So we'll take a look at that. This is going to lead me to offer a new approach. What I want you to do today is I want you to sort of clear your mind, zero base your approach to webinars, and consider a whole new way of thinking about it. And this might be a little bit of a leap of faith for you, but I want you to take the leap because I think that whether you're very experienced doing webinars or you're brand new at it, there are going to be some nuggets here for you. So take the leap with me. And if you do, I'm going to be offering you 5 guidelines to make your webinars better. And here's a sneak preview of the 5 things I'm going to be asking you to do from now on. So let's dive in. And let's talk about, before we do, I want to talk a little bit about a definition of terms, because a lot of people now are doing webinars, but they're also doing meetings, they're also doing webcasts, and we're all putting it on the same title, but to me, they mean different things. So let's define our terms more closely. When I think about a webinar, which is really what we're doing today, I think it comes from the actual definition of the word, which is a web seminar. I see webinars as more about information sharing, teaching, and training, where there's usually a speaker or a panel of speakers, and we're presenting information to you, and then there's time to ask questions and interact. Some people use these platforms more just for meetings, where there are no slides, it's just the video boxes that people see like in gallery mode, and it's more for discussion or decision making, basically taking those meetings around the table in your office and moving them online. And then there are webcasts. This is when we're talking about audiences in the hundreds, like today, or thousands, where it's more like a speech or a presentation or a performance with one person or one group pushing out to a larger group, and there is usually less of a chance for interaction. Now, as you can see in this Venn diagram, there's overlap because these things are similar and they have similar elements. But today, we're really going to talk about webinars primarily, with the notion being of when you are presenting information, either in a teaching, training mode, or just basically pushing it out to lots of people, how do you make the most of that process? So why do we webinar? What's the promise? Well, as I said earlier, the promise is that this is, practical and cost effective. Before the whole coronavirus thing hit, we still had people working in different locations. Some people were in the headquarters, some people were in different cities, some people working from home. So if you wanted to bring them together for a meeting or a training, what better way than to do it in the webinar format? And now, with almost everybody working at home in the new normal or the new abnormal, it's an even better time to do this kind of thing. And there are plenty of alternatives for doing it. Today we're using Zoom. Some of you may be more familiar with WebEx or GoToWebinar or these other platforms. They're easy to use, and the competition has driven the price down so that even if you're not using them for free, you can use them on a regular basis for fairly low cost. And a lot of people think, what's the big deal? We're just basically taking a presentation or a meeting or a training and we're moving it online. We can all see the same thing. We're all looking at the same slide. We're all hearing the same thing. The only thing we don't have is eye contact. We can't see each other across the table. So I've heard a lot of people kind of define webinars as, it's just a presentation minus eye contact. What's the big deal? Well, that's the promise. Here's the reality. Most presenters aren't that good to begin with. If we're talking about moving presentations or meetings online and we're turning it over to somebody to run the whole thing, well, a lot of them aren't doing very well. We did a book a few years ago called Why Bad Presentations Happen to Good Causes. And as part of the book, we surveyed 2,501 people to ask them about presentations. And one of the questions we asked was this, and Judy, I'm going to call you in for this one. We asked people, think about presentations you've seen for the last 6 months, in-person, in-room presentations. If you average them together, if you had to give them a letter grade, how good are the presenters doing? Judy, before we were all stuck inside like this, if you were seeing presentations, if you're sitting in the audience watching presentations over the last 6 months, and on average, you had to give the presenters a letter grade, what grade would you give them?
If I was an easy grader, maybe a B. If I was a harder grader, a C or lower.
Well, I think in our survey, I guess they must have been hard graders because our 2,501 people gave an average grade of a C minus. So here is this subpar work that we're starting with, and now we're moving it online with more technical hurdles. That's not a formula for success. And Judy, I'm going to come at you with another question. In our report, Dialing In, Logging On, Nodding Off, a copy of which we'll send to everybody after today, we did another survey. This time we surveyed 1,218 public interest professionals, people like you. And one of the questions we asked in this report was, you are now giving webinars or leading webinars. You've been thrust into the position of a webinar leader. How many of you are in that position but have had zero training, no training at all? And Judy, I'm going to ask you to guess, what percentage of our respondents said, yes, I'm leading webinars, and no, I haven't had any training?
I'd say over 85%. That's my guess.
Wow, well, that would be even worse. In our survey, it was 72%, but that's pretty bad. That's still 3 out of 4, no training. And lastly, here's the other problem. Your audience, the people who've dialed into your webinar, you might think that they live in Los Angeles or New York or Philadelphia or DC or wherever you are. They don't. They all live here. Distraction City, population 1, and if they're not in Distraction City, they're a few miles down the road in the sister city, Multitaskville, because the temptation to multitask is huge during webinars. When I think about people who take webinars at the Goodman Center, even people who've paid good money to be there, I think about this woman because she's dialed in, but maybe she's having a meal while she's at my webinar. Maybe she's checking her Facebook page on another open window. Maybe she's fielding a call, and she might have some other distractions as well. So maybe I have 20% of her attention going in. And so we have this. Judy had a very funny cartoon earlier. This is my version. Webinars as hell. So here's the promise. It saves time, it saves money. Not that different from in-person presentation. So what's the big deal? And we have all these platforms to choose from. So off we go. But the reality is that a lot of the presenters or webinar leaders are not that good to begin with. Now we're throwing new technical hurdles at them and they have not been trained. The people on the other end are strongly inclined to multitask and we end up feeling like we're in hell. So I think that's a little snapshot of where we are. So what do we want to do about it? Well, here's what I want to suggest, a new approach. And this came to me from my own personal experience because many years ago, before I got to do what I'm doing today, I worked in talk radio. And I was not one of these people on the screen here. I was not an on-air talent. If the camera could pan over to the right and you could see the people in the booth behind the glass window, the producer and the engineer, that's where I was. I was the producer. I was the guy picking up the phone saying, "Hi, you'll be the first caller. Can you hold, please?" Click. "Hi, you'll be the second caller. Can you hold, please?" Click. I was that guy. So I observed talk radio very closely for a number of years. Okay? So, as we say here in Hollywood, fade out, fade in. And many years later, I'm running a nonprofit, and now I'm participating in webinars like you are. And I'm sitting in my office at my desk, squinting at the screen, got my telephone to my ear because I'm getting the audio through the phone. And it occurred to me that maybe we shouldn't have this deficit-based approach, thinking about webinars as presenting minus eye contact. What if we thought about them instead as talk radio with the added bonus of visuals? Well, that's a different kind of approach, but take the leap of faith with me, and for the next 45 minutes or so, think that you are the host of the program, whether it's talk radio or on television. And as a host, you have 5 responsibilities to create an engaging, dynamic, interactive experience for your participants. And so really, what we're going to talk about the rest of the way is not so much your content. I'm going to trust that you have interesting content. but how you present it to be the most engaging that you can be, because I think that is our greatest single challenge, which is engagement. So let's dive in and let's talk about setting expectations. That's the first thing you need to do. And by the way, at the end of every one of these segments, we're going to stop and I want to hear from you. So as I talk about setting expectations, keeping it personal, etc., if you have ideas about how you do it or how you've seen it done, send the chat to Celia, because at the end of every segment, we're going to take questions, but we're also going to take your suggestions about how to do these 5 things even better. So with setting expectations, right from the beginning of the webinar, one thing you have to do, and Judy did it very well, is make sure people know how to use the platform. Just show them the basics of asking questions, dealing with technical problems, muting and unmuting, things like that. If you have people in your group using the same platform week in and week out, then you don't need to spend a lot of time on this, 10 or 20 seconds and off you go. But if you're introducing people to new platforms on a regular basis, you definitely want to stop and do this. We like to tell people, avoid groups in conference rooms. Sometimes there'll be people taking our webinars, there'll be 5 or 10 people, and they'll say, should we all meet in the conference room and join you that way? And I'll say, well, you can if you have really superior equipment, if you have a big screen on one side of the conference room so people can all see it clearly, if you have good microphones on the table so we can hear people clearly and they can hear the audio clearly, then fine, that'll work. And if you have to work as a team, then okay, that makes a lot of sense. But when people dial in individually from their own desk or home or office, one person with one headset, so they're hand-free, one internet connection, one audio connection, they generally will hear better, see better, be heard better. And if they have questions and they have to type them in, they've got a keyboard in front of them. They don't have to ask one person around the table to take the responsibility of asking all the questions. We just feel it's a better way for people to experience a webinar. With small groups, not like today, but small groups, 25, 20 or fewer, we like to tell people to leave the audio lines unmuted. Don't mute people right away when they come in. Leave those lines unmuted. And I'll tell you why. Because unmuted audio is the closest thing you have to eye contact. And I know it's true because, as you can see, it's written on the scroll of truth. Now, what do we mean by this? When your audio is muted, you know that people can hear you. So you can take calls, you can yell at somebody across the room, you can clack, clack, clack on the keyboard, no one's going to hear you. And it allows you to have a certain level of remove from the experience. But when your audio is unmuted and they know that they can literally hear you breathing, people tend to keep it quiet. They make sure they're not interrupted. If they're typing, they keep it down. But basically, they're a little more attached to the experience than when they have that wall of silence, between you. Now, of course, this is impractical for larger groups. Today, we muted the audio and left it muted because with 200 people or so, we can't expect everyone to follow the rules. But try it with smaller groups. I think you'll see a difference. Prepare people to interact. When we do our webinars at the Goodman Center, one of our introductory slides looks like this, where we tell people, we're going to be calling on you in the course of the webinar. Too often people are acculturated to sit back. I'm just going to sit back, take notes, and not say anything. But good webinars have lots of interaction. So the more you can get people prepared for that, the better. And of course, you want to have an agenda. Let people know exactly what you're going to be covering. And I particularly like agendas that show progress. In this case, in this agenda, people can see that we've covered the overview. Now we're on veterans pension, survivor benefits, and then we can see what's coming up next. So everything I've just told you, from giving explicit instructions to having agendas, all those things should happen in the first 30 seconds to 2 minutes of the webinar. Just enough time to make sure that everyone knows how to participate to the fullest. So that's about setting expectations. So what I want to do now is I want to turn to Celia and ask Celia in the chat box, has anybody sent in any suggestions about how they set expectations up front, something that we don't have here, or any questions about setting expectations? If so, let's hear from you, and if not, we'll move on. Celia?
We've actually gotten a couple of questions One related to interaction. I don't know if you want to save it for later or if you
Yes,
want to take it now.
well, we can. I think it sounds like it'd be appropriate for later. Let's come back to it.
Okay. Okay. Well, one question we've gotten about setting expectations is, how do you feel about starting on time? We're a group of almost 300 people now. If everybody hadn't been here at once, would you have started on time? What do you think, Andy?
I'm a fan of starting on time. I think if you want to send a signal to people, particularly if you do webinars on a regular basis, if you start on time, the next time people show up, they'll show up on time because they'll realize, oh, this is one of those webinars that starts on time. Now, that said, there are always going to be laggards. There'll be people who have a good excuse for being late. So what do you do for the people who arrived on time? Well, give them something to do. You'll see this in a moment. But when we start our webinars at the Goodman Center, we always have some slides called Points to Ponder while we wait for everyone to log on. So we give people some bonus information to read through, or we help them prepare for the webinar another way, or we'll do some back and forth. We'll do a little bit of a round robin to have people check in and tell us what they're up to, so that there is some content, there is some good use of the time, but we actually haven't started the full content of the webinar. So that's the way I like to do it. Let's move on. Thank you, Celia. And let's talk about keeping it personal, because this can be a very impersonal technology. You're staring at a screen, you're listening to the audio through your computer or your phone, and we're not seeing each other. Even though you can see me, I can't see you. So what are some things you can do to add the personal touch to what is otherwise an impersonal medium? Well, if you do have access to video boxes and it's a relatively small group, I say turn those videos on, let people see each other. That certainly adds a personal touch. And listen, it's been working for a long time. I mean, we can go all the way back to the Last Supper, and you can see obviously it worked there. If you don't have access to video, or you have to turn it off because you have a very large group, then you can create what we call student or participant slides, so that every time someone talks, if we can't see them through video, we can call up a slide with their picture, and so when Judy talks, I can put this up on the screen. You can also have speaker slides. Again, if you can't see them through video, have a slide like this. When we produced a webinar for the Communications Network, and the Lisas, Chen and Witter, were the co-hosts, we created a slide like this for them, so this could be on screen anytime they were talking. And there are several ways to handle this. A group called Encore had a webinar where they had 4 speakers. They had this slide to introduce all 4. And then when any one speaker would talk, like let's say Anita Cruz, a slide like this would come up. And here's another approach. NSTA had a webinar with 2 speakers, Scott Denning and Randy Russell. When Scott would speak, and when it was his slides, a little thumbnail picture of him would appear in the upper right-hand corner. And when Randy would take over with his slides, it would look like that. Kind of the moral equivalent of the video box corner. If you're going to use speaker slides or participant slides, you have to be prepared to toggle to them. So let me show you how we do that. What you're seeing here is a picture of my webinar workstation in my office. And you can see what I see. You see a large slide that shows what's on the screen at the moment. And you can see across the bottom the slides for the entire presentation, which I can toggle back and forth of. And taped to the webinar workstation is a list of the students in the class. And as you can see, there are their names and the numbers of their slides. So I know, for example, that Carol Abrams is on slide 22. So if Carol wants to speak or if I want to call on her, I can go to my keyboard. I'm in PowerPoint. I'm in full screen mode. And I can simply type the numbers 22 and hit enter, and boom, it jumps to Carol's slide. Now here's another subtle difference to make it personal, and this also comes from the world of radio. Here are 2 ways of starting your webinar. Good morning, everybody. Glad you could all join us today. Or, good morning. Glad you could join us today. Now, what's the difference? Well, you might look at the one on the left and say, well, you say everybody, you all, so you're more inclusive. You're speaking to the whole group. And that feels right. But something they tell you in radio is that when people experience radio, and very much webinars, the same thing, they're not sitting in a group of 100 people. Often they're by themselves, in their car, in their kitchen, in their home. So in radio, they teach you, speak as if speaking to an individual, and they will hear you and feel like you're talking to them. So when you say, "Good morning, glad you could join us today," it may feel like I'm speaking more to you, and you may feel just that much more connected. Because if I say, "Good morning, everybody, how you all doing today?" you kind of get that reaction. We also limit class size. When we're doing a webinar and we want to present information and get feedback from people, we limit our classes to about 25 students. If we have 50 people sign up, I'd rather do the class twice and really connect with each person in each class than have 50 people and have some people feel like they've been lost in the sauce. And so these are all techniques for keeping it personal. And I want to stop there and again turn to Celia and say, in the chat box, are there any questions or comments that have to do with this issue about just keeping it personal and overcoming the impersonality of this premise? If so, let's hear from them. If not, we'll move on.
We've actually had a couple of questions about connecting with different age groups. Do you have any suggestions on connecting with kids or teenagers as opposed to adults?
That's an interesting question. In a professional context, I don't have experience connecting with children or teenagers. In a personal context, yes, we've been using Zoom a lot for family meetings, as I'm sure all of you have. But in a professional context, no. But I will point you to a resource that might speak to this a little bit. There's a book out now, a business book. It's called The Remix. It's about communicating with different age groups in the workplace. Because more and more now in the workplace, we have all the way from boomers to Gen X to Gen Y to Gen Z to millennials. Lots of different age groups are now represented in the workplace, and how they communicate and what they respond to is different. And so not only in person, but also on webinars, there are different ways of presenting things that different generations will respond to. So check out this book, The Remix by Lindsay Pollack, Pollak. Shall we move on, Celia?
Another good question.
One more question.
Is how do you get agreement or confirmation to questions like, are we ready to move on from the group? Or do you?
Well, it depends on sort of the tyranny of the clock. Today we have a very fast hour, so we're going to have to limit the questions, but we have built in what we call after class time so that if there are questions, comments, or any lingering issues, we will deal with it afterwards. And that's something you might consider. Build in extra time at the end of your webinar so that you can follow your agenda, you can respect people's time, but you have a fallback position where you can deal with stuff that you didn't get to. And with that, let's move on. And let's talk about the biggest single challenge, which is keeping people involved. And we know this from the research. When we did our report, dialing in, logging on, nodding off, we looked at teleconferences, video conferences, and webinars. And one of the questions we asked was, what are the most common problems you run into? And then we ranked them by frequency. And you can see there that with teleconferences, just connecting by phone, number one, people on the call didn't participate. And we did this for video conferences and for webinars. And take a look, lack of participation comes in 1 or 2 in every one of these categories. So what do you do about it? Well, once again, I'm always thinking about this woman. What can I do to keep her engaged despite all the temptations to multitask? Well, one thing we do, and I mentioned this earlier, question Celia asked, is give people who join on time something to do. And that's why we have what we call points to ponder. In our webinar, Meetings for People Who Hate Meetings, if you show up on time, but we haven't started because other people are still late, we'll give you some things to read like this. NSTA will put up a slide like this while you're waiting for the program to begin, something to do. This organization, Engage, would call on people. What do you hope to learn in today's session? And get a little more feedback live from the people who have joined in. Here's one of my favorite techniques. Look for ways to ask questions. Don't just present information. Turn it around and get people engaged. We did a webinar a few years back about design principles, whether we're talking about brochures or annual reports, or in this case, web pages. And one piece of information we wanted to present was from a guy named Jacob Nielsen, who is a guru of a web, of how people use the web. And one of the things he learned from heat mapping studies is that if you actually track people's eyes across a page, and that's what the heat mapping does, you can see what they look at first, second, third, etc. And he discovered that people tend to scan web pages, like you see here, in an F-shaped pattern. They start in the upper left-hand corner because they've learned over time that that's where the logo usually is. So let's find out what the organization is. And then they scan left to right, like reading a page, a printed page. And those scans are progressively shorter and shorter, and that's how you get the F-shaped pattern. So knowing this, if you're designing web pages, particularly a home page, you can design to put your important stuff where people are looking first. Okay, that's good information. But in the early versions of our webinar, we just presented that information. Here it is, take it in, learn it. After a while, we thought, well, how do we get people more engaged? So we started to include a pop quiz that included this question. According to eye tracking studies, your eyes are most likely to follow which pattern? And then I could call on somebody and say, what do you think? And they could take their guess and justify their answer. But at least they're doing some critical thinking, and we're hearing another voice. Here's another example. Here's a slide presenting managing versus leading. On the left, 5 bullet points about managing, and on the right, 5 bullet points about a higher level, leading. Now, again, this is just information presented for you to take in and absorb and hopefully learn. But imagine if we took these 10 bullet points and the slide looked like this. And now we called on people and said, okay, number 1, keeping things running smoothly. Is that managing or leading? What do you think? Number 7, works within context, managing or leading. What do you think? Making people do a little critical thinking. Polling is another nice technique. Zoom allows you to do polls. You can prepare them in advance, or if something comes up, you can actually create them on the spot. Here's an example. Let me blow that up for you. This is not actually a live poll. You can't take it now, but we could have created this poll and put it up there and asked people to check a box, gives them a chance to participate, and then when you put the results up, they can see how they compare to everybody else. You can also ask them to do pre-work. In our webinar, Why Bad Presentations Happen to Good Causes, we present the results of a national survey. And what we do is before people come to the webinar, we send them a shortened version of the survey and say, hey, take a moment to fill this out. The column that says me, my opinion. You'll tell us about your experience with presentations, and then bring this to the webinar, and we'll show you the national results, and you can compare your results with the national results, see how you stack up. Hopefully creates a little interest walking in. And stop and take questions frequently. A lot of people will just wait till the end. I like to stop after every major section because let's deal with the questions as they come up. And you can send a visual signal like this, or as the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation does, you can put the instructions up about how to ask questions every time you take them so people can look and say, oh, this is how I do it. And boom, they ask their question. And if you're going to take questions, particularly with large groups like today, and you've got a chat box working, I always like to have a separate person monitoring the chat box. It's hard enough like this to present information and to try and be engaging and keep people excited, and also watch that chat box as it populates with questions, and you see all this text scrolling by. So I've asked Celia to keep an eye on the chat box. She'll look at the questions, and then she'll relay them to me. And also, if several questions come in of the same theme, she can chunk them together and ask an overarching question so that I've answered, 5 questions basically at the same time. Sometimes with Q&A, you want to start by asking questions to the audience. Have some questions ready to throw at them so that if nobody's asking questions, you can throw some out and maybe you pull them in that way. Or you might even want to plant a few questions. Send them to some friends or colleagues in advance and say, hey, when I get to section 3, would you ask this question? So that people in the audience hear questions coming in and they think, oh, well, if she can do it, I can do it too. So these are all techniques to keep people involved. And again, please take a look at this list. And if you, in running webinars or participating in webinars, have seen other techniques strictly designed to keep people engaged and fight this tendency to multitask, put them in the chat box and we can build our list there, or send us a question. And Celia, let me go to you again. Questions or comments about keeping people engaged?
Yes, we have a couple of questions. Catherine asks or says, that she is going to be giving a webinar soon. It's going to be pre-recorded, and she's wondering if you have any tips on how to make a webinar feel interactive without actually having live participants.
Well, that is harder, but we've actually done that ourselves. We've had some webinars where there was no one there, and we just had to record it and send it out. And in that case, if I have places where I would ask a question and hope to get an answer, what I'll tend to do is ask the question and leave a pause so that someone who's watching it can answer. For example, I would say, so we did a survey of people who are leading webinars but have had no training, and what percentage do you think said, yes, I lead webinars, but no, I've had no training? Where do you think it came in? Well, believe it or not, 72%. So I'll just leave a pause where if someone's watching it, they can almost feel like I'm talking to them and come up with an answer and then see what it is. So you always pretend like there's someone there and give them the opportunity to sort of participate, even if it's watching a recording. One more question, Celia?
Another question, this comes from Griffin, and he says, how do you feel about using props, like something that you're holding and moving around in front of the camera to engage the audience instead of just being a talking head next to the slides?
I'd have to see what they're talking about, but I think it can work. I think there are certain props that can work. In fact, I actually have one here. I have these, sometimes in my webinars, I have these little things, here, wait, hold up there. It looks like a dialogue box, doesn't it, right? And sometimes I'll write something on it like it's coming out of my own mouth. Now that's just for humor's sake, but you know, there are some props that work. I guess I'd have to say it depends. So case by case basis. All right, let's move on. Again, if you have questions that we haven't gotten to, we will have after class time, so we'll stick around. Next section is about using your assets. And Judy Browse, I want you to get ready because I'm going to bring you in here in a second. When you are doing a webinar, you really have two principal assets. You have your visuals, that which people are seeing, whether it's slides or video, and you have the audio, what they're hearing. And you want to do everything you can to make the most of both those things. So let's talk about how you do that. They say when you go on television that television adds 10 pounds. Have you ever heard that? That's why people have to be so skinny on TV. It's like, you know, you go on TV, you look a little bit wider. Well, there's kind of the opposite thing happening on radio. When you go on the radio, you lose 10 to 20% of the clarity. Not only radio, but also telephones or even microphones like I'm using today with your computer. Because there's two things happening. One's technical and one's performance. With radio, telephones, microphones, there's a certain thing called compression, where you lose the high end and the low end, and you tend to hear sort of the middle range of your voice. It can make you sound a little bit more monotonal. But also, if you can't see a video of the person, you can see me today, but if you couldn't, you lose the ability to see their face as they talk. So you don't see the eyebrow raise or the frown, visual signals that tell you a little bit more about what they mean. So you have to compensate for this. And Judy, this is where I need your help. So if you can open up your video again, we'll want to bring you in.
Okay. Should I make faces?
Not yet. Judy and everybody, I want you to read this right now to yourselves. Just read this. This talks about how you compensate for what the microphone is doing to your voice. Everyone take a moment to read that. I'll be quiet and then we'll talk about it. All right, Judy, you have a chance to read that through?
Yes, I did.
All right. So here's what I want you to do. And Judy, we're putting you on the screen there. See there? I'm turning the webinar over to you now. You're in charge. And I want you to read this to the audience, but don't do anything special. Just read it in your normal speaking voice as if this was your script. But let's pretend that they can't see it. This is your script, and you're talking to them about how to compensate for this thing called the radio factor. So just take a deep breath, and in your normal speaking voice, just read this aloud, and let's hear how it sounds.
In radio, they teach announcers to really emphasize or punch keywords because the audience doesn't have visual cues to help them understand. and because the higher and lower ends of the audio may be lost in the transmission. The telephone can be even worse. So what may feel like overemphasizing to you will actually sound normal to the listeners.
All right, that was fine. But here's what I want you to do, Judy. I want you to do it again, but this time I want you to do what the text is telling you to do. I want you to punch the keywords. I want you to overemphasize so that the meaning is really coming through. And I want you to do it to the extent that it even feels silly to you doing it. I want you to overact by 15 to 20%, okay? This might feel silly to you, but I think you're gonna prove a point for me. Does that make sense?
I will give it my best.
All right, take a deep breath and let's hear it one more time. So this is Judy Browse, take 2.
In radio, they teach announcers to really emphasize or punch keywords because the audience doesn't have visual cues to help them understand. And because the higher and the lower ends of the audio may be lost in the transmission. The telephone can be even worse. So what may feel like overemphasizing to you will actually sound normal to the listeners.
All right, let me call on Celia because she's an unbiased third party here. Celia, if you had to listen to Judy Browse as the dominant voice in the webinar for an hour, which Judy would you rather hear? Take 1 or take 2?
Definitely take 2. And feel free to chat in your preference in the chat box if you have one and you are listening. I'm assuming others are going to agree with me.
Very good. It might actually feel silly, Judy, but it's really true. People are listening to your voice and you can't speak in your normal voice because it will start to sound more monotonal and you'll start to sound like you're droning on, and you don't want to do that to people. So Judy, thank you for playing along. Something else you can consider is leading meetings or hosting classes standing up. When you stand and speak, your body is more expressive. You can gesticulate. Your voice will be more expressive. When you're sitting there hunched over your laptop at a kitchen table, you don't sound the same. That's another thing they teach you in radio. Do it standing up. And bring in other voices. The more you can bring in other voices, the more you can break up the monotony. Other speakers, for sure, or participants as much as possible. Now let's talk about your visuals. If this is what you're asking people to look at over the course of an hour, why would you think they're going to want to look at this? If this is what your slides look like? I mean, really. Yeah, you could, and if that's what your slides are, hey, email them the PowerPoint, let them print them out at their end or put them up on their screen. There's nothing interesting to look at there. So if you're going to have all this real estate in front of people's eyes, make the most of it. This is an actual slide from Educators for Fair Consideration where they're talking about their vision. It's their vision, people. This should be inspiring, right? Well, how about something more like this, where they take a picture. This picture was lurking in the back of their PowerPoint deck. You know, have something with a little bit more emotional content to it. Make it just a little bit more interesting to look at. Take things off your slides. They're just visual noise. Footnotes, annotations, things like that. You can supply those later. Those don't need to be on the screen, neither in in-person workshops or in webinars. Just give them the good stuff. And if you have a direct quote or lots of text, do this. Now, thanks to Zoom and GoToWebinar and so many of these platforms, video, like the video box of me now, is becoming a regular part of these webinars. So if you're going to be on video, take a few moments to set yourself up right and don't make a lot of the common mistakes, because if people are going to look at you, you want to give them something to look at. When I sit in this office I'm in right now, I leave those curtains open and I'm lit from behind, this is what I look like. So beware of bad lighting. I've seen a lot of people do webinars where they are not centered in their screen, or you're looking at the top of their head for the whole time. That's no good either. Some people will do webinars where they're leading it and their laptop is literally in their lap or on their kitchen table, and they're looking down in this very unflattering angle. And sometimes people want to look at the other people in the webinar, and they'll look off to their video boxes, which are maybe down the right side or the left side of the screen, and there's no eye contact. Right now I'm looking at the little green dot, on my monitor that says, here's where the camera is. So it looks like I'm looking at you. If I were to look at your video boxes, I'm looking over here. And no eye contact, that's also lessening a connection between you and the people you're talking to. So here's your checklist. Make sure you have good lighting, good framing, good solid, a non distracting background, and make eye contact with the people you're talking to. It may be a little box in the upper right-hand corner, but it makes a difference. And also you may want to bring in pre-recorded video, like from YouTube and things like that. That's a nice way to break up the flow, give people something interesting to look at. Right now there's a video on YouTube called A Video Conference Call in Real Life. When you get a chance later, check it out. It's hilarious. If I wanted to show you a 30-second clip from that, I would put it full screen so that there's nothing else distracting, or I would put it on a black slide so there's nothing else in the background, so you see something that looks like this.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for being here on time. Paul? Hey, Paul, can you hear me? I can't hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yes. Hey, Tyler.
Sorry I'm late. Having a hard time connecting.
1 second. Paul's having a sound issue.
I can't hear you. Try adjusting your output settings. Can you hear me? The computer icon.
Tyler, are you on hotel Wi-Fi?
Yeah.
And it goes on like that for a while. But check it out when you get a chance. But video is another, imported video like that is another nice way to sort of break up the flow, keep people interested. We could spend a lot more time talking about visuals and design, but we don't have it here. So let me point you some good resources. Presentation Zen Design by Gar Reynolds is an excellent book for even beginners, like me, to learn how to design better slides. You don't have to be a professional graphic designer. Slideology by Nancy Duarte. Nancy Duarte is one of the premier designers in the country. She's designed slides for Al Gore and Steve Jobs when he was alive. And you can download our book, Why Bad Presentations Happen to Good Causes, for free. And there's plenty of design tips in there as well. So again, compensate for the radio factor. You've got to make your voice interesting. Bring in other voices to break up the monotony. Pay attention to your visuals, whether you're on screen yourself or you're just talking about your slides. Let me stop again, Celia, and check with you. Other techniques that you have used or you're aware of that help to make it interesting visually and orally. You are orally. Celia, if you have any suggestions, let's hear them, or any questions, and then we'll move on.
Jessica says that she's thinking of sending an activity box out prior to a professional development day so they can do some activities along with her as she presents. Do you have any thoughts or experiences with doing something like that? I mean, especially in this age when we physically can't all be together, and a few others had questions about kind of sending out some materials in support of a presentation. Any thoughts on that?
I'd love to know more about this activity box, and if we can get some information on that after the webinar, let's do it. But yes, I think that these can be potentially very helpful. I mentioned earlier the pre-work when we have people do the short version of the survey for bad presentations and then come in and compare that. I think anything along those lines where there's something that keeps them busy and active and involved and connects directly, organically to what you're talking about is a good thing. So yes, I'm in support of that. I'd love to see some examples. If we can collect those, that would be wonderful.
So we've gotten a number of questions about, Zoom backgrounds and other backgrounds like that. And I know you said less distracting the better, but lots of people are still asking about different Zoom backgrounds. So final word on that.
I'm not a fan. I've seen a lot of the backgrounds that Zoom provides. To me, there's always a quality to them that just looks sort of fake, and it always sort of takes me out of the experience. If you have a background like this, which is hopefully interesting but not distracting, or even a background like you have, Celia, which is just a flat color but not distracting, I think that's sufficient. If you can show me a Zoom background that's one of those fake backgrounds they offer that really looks good, I'm willing to be convinced, but I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. So I just say keep it simple. And let's move on because we are running out of time. Thank you, Celia. And let's do what it says. Let's keep it moving. What I mean by this is that when you are relying on slides, particularly like we are today, if you leave a slide on the screen for a long period of time, any type of static screen, whether it's one slide or one speaker for a long period of time, it can send a signal to the audience that, well, I've taken this in visually, so I can just listen now and I can go do something else. So I like to keep it moving. Every time you change the slide, change the image, it can re-cue interest, or it just sends a visual signal, things are changing, we need your attention. 2 words, always build. Here's a slide that we used to use in our storytelling workshops that fails in 2 ways. In this slide, we want to talk to people about story structure, how to build a good story. Well, first of all, that could be much more interesting graphically. We could actually build a schematic of a story, give people something interesting to look at. And I'll show you that in a second. But also, here we have just 5 bullet points, which isn't interesting to look at all. But if I am going to work my way through those bullets, if I'm talking about bullet point number 1 and I'm elaborating on that, what are you doing? You're reading all the other bullets. You're taking it in and you're saying to yourself, okay, I've got this. He's behind me now. I'll wait for him to catch up and I'll check my email while he's catching up. So if you present all the information at once, it gives your audience a chance to take it in all at once, and then they're not focused where you want them focused. If, on the other hand, you build it in front of them and say, today we're going to talk about story structure, and first I'm going to tell you about the protagonist. And while I'm talking about that, that's all you've got to look at until I bring in the next element and the next one after that, and on and on. I build the slide in front of you to keep you engaged with what I'm talking about. You can do this, for example, with a very simple bar graph. If you present all the information at once again, they'll take it all in. They'll make their own decisions about whether they need to follow you. But if you use an animation to bring in each segment as you're ready to talk about it, then you have a chance to keep them focused where you want them focused, and the dynamic action, the animation, hopefully keeps them interested. Because if you don't do this, you can end up with something like this, where you have a slide on the screen for 3.5 minutes or 4.5 minutes. This is from a real webinar. Or when they interviewed Wendy Callens, their guest expert, this slide was on the screen for 15 minutes while she was talking. Now, look, maybe it's just a super fascinating interview, but if it becomes pure radio where you're just listening and there's nothing to see on screen, a lot of people will take this as a cue to say, okay, I can listen and I can do something else while I'm listening. But had they pre-interviewed Wendy and said, Wendy, what are some of the things you're going to talk about? And she says, well, I'm going to talk about something called the walking school bus, where kids wear these yellow protective vests and they walk together and it kind of looks like a bus. Well, you could look for that picture online, and so that when Wendy starts talking about it, you could pull up a slide that looks like this. And then when she stops talking about it, you can go back to her speaker slide. And then when she talks about another safe route to school, kids biking to school together in 2s and 3s with a parent, you could pull up a picture like this. And then when she's on to the next thing, back to Wendy. You can also intersperse participant or student slides and speaker slides so that you're constantly changing things up, showing people different things. Now, what this means is you may have to be prepared to make a lot of slides. Believe it or not, for today's webinar, and we are approaching the end, for today's webinar alone, for 1 hour, there were over 130 slides in this presentation. Now, if you're thinking, oh gosh, am I going to have to prepare 130 slides for a 1 hour presentation? No, you don't have to. But what I'm telling you is that the more slides you have to play with, the more you can keep the screen moving, the better chance you have of keeping people engaged. Now, if we're talking about a web meeting, where it's mostly just a gallery view of a bunch of people and talking heads and you're cutting from one to the other, that may be enough in itself. But if you're reliant primarily on slides like we are today, the more you can keep it moving, the merrier. So, always build. intersperse speaker and student slides, and be prepared to create many slides and to jump around from slide to slide like I talked earlier. If you have the slides numbered and you know the numbers of your slides, you can type that number into your keyboard, jump to any slide at any time. So that's it. These are the 5 guidelines for being a good talk show host in your webinar. I want to give you 2 caveats before we wrap up. And again, we'll take questions in after class time because we are at the end of our time here. Here's caveat number 1. Take a moment to read that. And secondly, no matter how interesting the webinar is, it's still sitting and staring at a computer screen. So we like to limit our webinars to just 1 hour. If we have more than an hour of content, then we'll take a long break, 15 or 20 minutes, let people get up, answer the call of nature, answer their email, stretch their legs before they sit back down again, because I don't care how interesting you are, 1 hour, it's tough just to sit there and stare at a computer for any more time than that. With that, a closing thought, and then I'll turn it back to Judy, and then we will stick around for after class time. No matter who you're talking to, remember where they live. Multitaskville is a place that we're all up against, and until you deal with that, it's not going to matter what your content is. So consider trying delivering webinars in a new way. Try this notion of being the talk show host and with the added bonus of visuals. And we think that you're going to have webinars that are more interesting, more engaging, and more dynamic than they ever have been. And one last thought. Stay home, stay safe, stay well. We need you guys, and we'll all be on the other side of the curve eventually. Thanks to Judy and Ann and everybody at NAAEE for this opportunity. I'm going to turn it back to them, and then after they're done, we're going to go to after class time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Andy. That was so great. And Celia, thank you so much for fielding the questions. I've been writing them down too. So many wonderful thoughts in the chat. You'll get a copy of this so that you can see the resources other people have put in. You'll get the slides, you'll get the recording and all of that. Andy, thanks for sharing your wisdom with all of us. No matter how many times I hear you, I learned something. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Ann to wrap this up in 2 minutes, and then Andy is willing to stay for another 15 minutes to answer a few additional questions. So Ann, take it away, and thank you too.
Thank you so much, Andy. And I'm going to attempt to use my best radio voice for the last minute that we have all together. Just wanted to let everybody know that you will get a recording of this webinar by the end of the week. You'll also get all the slides as well as the resources that Andy mentioned earlier. If you ever miss that email for whatever reason, or if you want to check out any of our recordings, you can always find them on our website on EE Pro. So not to fear, we always have them on our website. Additionally, many of you have asked for more resources for the field during this challenging time. Some of you are teachers and doing online classes for the first time, or maybe your parents doing homeschooling for the first time. We've compiled a growing list of resources for the field divided by age, grade band. You'll find all kinds of lesson plans, virtual tours, and that list keeps growing. So please check it out. It's on our website. And now I know from Andy that we don't need to include the link on the bottom. We will change that, Andy, for the next time we share that. And want to let you know that we have a number of upcoming webinars, very exciting for April and May. A ton of webinars. We hope to see you next week, where we'll be talking about how to move some place-based online learning to more, or place-based learning online. And we've got a number of webinars focused on fundraising, storytelling, engaging Latino audiences, and more. So please stay tuned. We've got lots of exciting webinars coming up. And that is all that we've got. Thank you for joining. And Andy, I'll pass it back to you to lead us through after class time.
Yes, let me share my screen again so we can have that available to us. Oh, here we are, share screen. So, Celia, if there were some questions, comments, or any other business in the chat box that you were keeping track of that we didn't get to, let's start with those. Anything from the previous segments?
Yes. So there were a number of suggestions in the chat box, but hopefully folks had a chance to look those over.
Okay.
There are a couple of questions that we didn't get to. One comes from Mike, and he asked a question about the agenda. He says he noticed that you were visiting the agenda as we went, but what are your thoughts on having the agenda sitting on the side of the screen and kind of letting us know where we are as you're going?
That's interesting. When you say sitting on the side of the screen, I'm not sure what that looks like or how you arranged that.
I think
you can also send out an agenda by, sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I'd say you can certainly send out an agenda as a document in advance. Let people have it handy and just tell them, have your agenda handy so you can track where we are. But in terms of having off to the side, I'm not sure what you mean by, are you talking about just having sort of sharing a screen and having a document sitting on the left side of the screen or something?
I just interpret it as it being built into the slides, I was thinking.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Almost like sort of navigation down the side of the slide. That would be one way of doing it. Sure. I think that's good. It might take, it depends on how much real estate it takes up, but if you can keep it limited, sure, why not?
A number of people had questions about how do you handle introductions? Obviously, in a class of this size, we didn't do introductions for everybody joining us, but how do you handle introductions in a class of, say, 25 or 20?
In the Goodman Center webinars, when we do our webinars, we have student slides for everybody participating. And what we'll do is, at the very beginning of the class, after I cover the logistics and get people off to a good start, we'll put up a student slide for each person. And actually, I'll show you an example. Hold on. Let me demonstrate my own techniques here, right? Oops. Oops, sorry, hold on. That was well done. There we go. Okay, so for example, let's say Judy Browse is in my class. I would go through the members of the class and say, okay, Judy's in the class. Judy, tell us a little bit about what you do at NAAE and what you hope to learn today, and give her 20 or 30 seconds. And so we put this up on the screen. If we have video boxes, we don't need this, but we just do a quick round robin, but we tell people, brief and brilliant, tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you hope to learn. And if you can do that in just a couple of minutes with a small group, absolutely. I think it's a good way to start. Now, we generally, if we have a group that's meeting on a regular basis, we'll do that at the beginning. But once we're meeting again and again, we won't repeat that because presumably everybody's been introduced. But the first time people gather, absolutely. Additional questions, Celia?
Yes. We have a question. It's a little bit of a technical question, but I promised Meredith from the very beginning that we'd get to it. So she wants to know how to toggle between PowerPoint and the face of the speaker in Zoom. Can you quickly tell us how you're doing that?
Yes, and I'll do a little prop here. So I have a printout. Oh, actually, you know what? I skipped this slide. Let me show it to you. Here it is. So what you're seeing in the picture now is there's my screen, right? And there's that slide full screen. And I have in front of me a printout of all my slides in slide sorter view. You see that there. And the slides are all numbered. So I can go to any slide at any time by typing that number into my keyboard and hitting enter. So if I wanted to go to that slide with the illustration, I just go to the keyboard, hit 2, 9, enter, and boom, I go right to that. I can use that for speaker slides, participant slides, basically any slide I want to go to. That's how you call it up.
Okay, so I think we're probably going to go until 2:15 because we have a few more questions.
That's fine.
One question is actually about the chat box. Do you have any suggestions on how to use the chat box when it can sometimes be distracting for people, guidelines on how to tell people how often to check the chat box? Are you checking the chat box, etc.?
Well, I would just want to, let me just find the slide for this. Hold on. I want to reiterate what I said earlier. Let me pull up a visual aid. Sorry. I do have a slide that pertains to this. When you've got 135 slides, sometimes it takes you a while to find what you're looking for. Oh my goodness. I know it's there. Oh, for God's sakes. Here it is. Okay, so imagine this is what you're looking at, and you're the presenter, and on the left is the slide that's up on the screen, and we're all seeing that, and on the right's the chat box. And it's empty, as you see now, but if it's filling with questions, and those questions are quickly scrolling by, that can be very distracting. So what do? Well, I always have a separate person, in this case, the lovely and talented Celia Hoffman, watching the chat box so that she can see the questions, take notes, be ready to relay them, and even better, chunk together similar questions so we can answer 4 or 5 questions at the same time. So if you have to do it on your own, sometimes you don't have the luxury of a second person, then you have to divide attention as best you can. But if you can get a colleague or friend to help you with that, it takes the burden off of you to keep an eye on what can be a very busy chat box.
We had a question about accessibility, how to make sure that the webinar works for folks with different, who may be deaf or blind or other things like that. And Judy, did you want to speak to that?
Yes, it's a very important question. I was going to say we can send out some information on that because we are held to the guidelines to make sure that everything is as accessible as possible, especially for the webinars that we do with federal agencies. So if anybody is interested in that, we will send out information on that as well, including how you build your slides and how you do this work so that people that really have issues with hearing or seeing or any other disabilities can take part in it. So that's a great question. We can follow up with all of you on that. And by the way, if you have a chance to have 2 people monitoring the chat, me and Ann and I are doing this where, it's really hard to keep up. Celia, you're amazing. And when you have 300 people on and 1 million questions, the more you can have and toss it back and forth, the more helpful it is so the speaker isn't inundated trying to keep up on it. Back to you.
Great. Let's see. We had a few more here. This is a question we get all the time. How do you stop people from going on and on, be it in introductions or when they have a question or comment?
Yeah, we do get that a lot. That's a tough one. You have to learn how to interrupt graciously. Sometimes if someone's going on and I get the sense that they're just never going to stop, I will jump in and say something to the effect of, "Oh, that's a very interesting comment. Let me see if I have the essence of what you're saying," or I think I know where this question is going. Let me see if I can get to that," and I'll just jump in. I have not had to go to the extent of actually muting their phone for them. It hasn't gotten that bad, although some people actually recommend that you jump in and you jump in with the left hand and you mute the phone with the right hand, so that they don't fire back. But I often find that simply jumping in to compliment them on their comment or their question and to anticipate where they're going or to just sum up what they're saying and move on generally works. So that's what I try and do.
You mentioned that there are, there's all of us watching the chat, and you like to have somebody watching the chat while you're hosting a webinar. Are there other roles that in a perfect world you would have filled during all of your webinars? Other kind of behind the scene things that you would have someone doing, for instance? Oh, sorry. I know in a perfect world, we probably would also have somebody handling technical issues
Yes.
that would come up. I mean, between the 4 of us, It's much easier when Andy and I just do a webinar, the two of us. I think in a perfect world, there would also be somebody doing any kind of troubleshooting with technology, since
Yes.
it's very hard to make sure everybody's online while you're also hosting or monitoring the chat.
Yeah, Ann, I don't know if you're that person for NAAEE. We did a webinar last week for a group called Encore, and their IT specialist was on the line with us. So I had Celia watching the chat box. I had that person there as well. And any question that came up that was a technical question, Duncan was able to chime in and answer it. That's the only thing I can think about. Let me go to you guys, because I know you do a lot of webinars. Judy or Ann, anything you want to add about what you do behind the scenes?
Yeah, so I would just add that it is helpful to have someone doing technical support. Judy mentioned in the beginning that people can reach out to me, for example, send me an email offline if they're having any trouble with audio or video or hearing things. So that's absolutely helpful. And as Judy mentioned, having at least one person, maybe two people, field questions in the chat box, especially for a group this large, that is particularly helpful. But I think number one is someone monitoring the chat, and then number two, someone else doing tech support while you're speaking.
Very good. I think we have time for one more question, and then after that, I'll provide my email address. So if we haven't gotten to your question, you can send me an email directly, and I'll be happy to answer that way. So Delia, fish me one more.
Okay, one more question is from Liana, and she says, if you have the same speaker the whole time, is it a best practice to keep the webcam on the whole time, or is it sometimes good to turn it off and just see the slides?
It actually, you're absolutely, it actually is a good process to turn it off sometimes. I tend to leave mine on because then I find myself forgetting to turn it back on and turn it off, etc. I think it's a good idea to turn it off, particularly when you show videos and things like that. The more you can keep the screen clean, where people are only looking at what's important, the better. So it's a judgment call. Frankly, I think I could do it better. I probably could turn my video off more often than I do. And with that, we're going to have to leave it there because we do have to move on. My email address is Andy, A-N-D-Y, at thegoodmancenter.com. If you have a question we didn't get to, please email me directly, and I promise you I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And with that, Judy and Ann, I want to turn it back to you for the last time.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you, Celia. And I just want to thank Ann for all the work she does on the whole webinar series, and to everyone who participated. We hope you have so many wonderful webinars coming up in you, and we will send you the recording and all the chatter, because there were a lot of good resources and ideas there. Thank you all so much. And Andy, thanks for being willing to answer even more questions. So take care, everybody. Good luck. Stay safe. Don't breathe. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Ready?